Alrighty, should be good to go here. How's it going, guys? Hope you're having a good weekend so far. This took me a little bit longer than I thought it would. I've been trying to do other stuff, catching up from my sick day. So I was able to manage migrating everything from the processing exercise over to the P5. I had to, restructure the whole thing. So it is live now, and hopefully this will go smoothly. I walked through it myself once. If there is a couple hiccups, we'll just kind of find them as we go and solve them. So this lecture is with the assumption that you've already went over the hour of code the other day in class and comprehended what was going on there. You should have gotten through at least the first, like the preface and the first chapter or so of the book. The pages, the PDF that I gave you guys. If you haven't gotten through that, it's probably worth it for you to pause this, go read that. It should only take you a few minutes, and then hop back on here. I did go over the p5.js lecture as well. So if you haven't gone through that, and if you're newer to code, you definitely want to go through that first. So I guess I'm just making sure that you're going through the right steps so that you're not shooting yourself in the foot and you're actually like absorbing this content in the right way. So we can go ahead and dive in here. This tutorial is in two parts. I will note that the second part is not yet converted, and that'll take me a lot of the weekend really to kind of formulate that, because there's a lot more content. We're going to be dealing with images. So today we're going to just be using shapes and audio. We're going to be injecting audio in. So let's kind of go down through here, see if there's anything else worth noting. If you haven't yet, if you're newer to coding, I probably would say just stick with the class stuff for now. But as you start to learn things, you'll definitely want to check out some shift-in videos at some point. Updated a bunch of links here. So we will be covering some use of conditional statements that I mentioned from the lecture. And there is a bunch more information here on them. If you don't follow them still after this exercise, definitely head to that link and see if you can get a different perspective. If you still can't, then make sure you're asking me on Monday. We are covering just one use of sound in this example here, and it's just from a file, right? We're playing from a file. However, I will note that I did find this page on sound on the P5 site, and it goes over a lot of different ways you could be utilizing audio. So I wouldn't just stick to, the bare bones, depending on what your project is trying to achieve here. Because obviously we know that we can do, apply effects to audio, but having the effects be live based on an interaction is, completely different. So especially if you're accustomed to code, going to be wanting to get in here and check out some different things that are going on that you can be doing. How to use a button, keyboard keys, so forth. We will be going over the print command. I think I spoke about that in the lecture. Okay, so I will be going down through at a steady pace. If you guys get stuck or whatever, obviously you can pause this. It's a YouTube video. You could like slow down the speed or speed up the speed. I find that helpful sometimes. So this tutorial was made by Dominic Licata in the art department. He's one of the techs over there. And I totally could have done my own. It's just nice. It's a simple little thing and it does its job. So I'm like, you know what? I'll just stick with it. It saves me a couple hours of coming up with something new and tweaking a bunch of things to get it to be new. So, all right, diving in here. First thing you're going to do is download this exercise audio files. They will be, specifically incorporated, so it'll be beneficial to use these for this example. And then as you go on, obviously, you're going to use your own. I already have them here, and I will note that there's 2 of each file name, right? And they're just different extensions. And the reason this is that some browsers can't play all of the different formats. So since we're utilizing browsers to work, we do have to make sure we're kind of preparing, for the inevitable. Not everybody's going to be using the same browser. So this way, we'll be calling on the file name, and it'll be able to read whichever file extension that it needs. So once you have that downloaded, unzip it, have them ready, and then we're just going to make a new sketch, right? And so by default, it'll just have its own random name here. So we'll want to go ahead and change that. Exercise for part 1. I'm going to do 01 because I think I already saved the previous one that I was working on. Okay. And the first thing we're going to do is just get our audio prepped, because then we can just dive into code and see it working and not have to have it fail before we add the audio. So right here, this is what I said in my lecture. I don't know if you've popped open yet. This little drop over arrow, collapsible arrow, shows you all of your files, right? These are what's happening behind the scenes. And you could clearly see here that there's additional information in here, but we're just working in our sketch file, okay? What we would want to do is add our audio files here. If you're only working with a couple files, it's probably fine. But once you're building a full, larger scale project, you don't want to have this tons of files listed over on the side. It's a little sloppy. So what I want you to do, following the example here, is we're going to be adding a folder. You go to Sketch up here, you add a folder, and we'll call this Assets. And add. And as soon as we add that, it plops it over here into our sketch files. And from there, if we hover on it, we see we have another drop-down arrow. And if we click that drop-down, we actually can upload files. And that's exactly what we've been working our way towards. So from this point, all we need to do is select all of our audio files, should be 8 of them, from that zip. And we can just drag and drop them right here. They don't all appear, at least in my browser and my computer, they don't all appear to be loading the correct way, but once they pop up on the side, that should be all you need. And then we're good to start going here. So this style of exercise for coding, rather than having you type in all of this stuff, I give you chunks at a time, and they're all in orange. So anything orange coming up is going to be code to be injecting. But then we're going to talk about it and review it, right? So it's not just like you're following blindly here. So I'm going to take all of this, copy it, and paste it above setup. So here's our setup, right? This is our whole setup block. So I want to paste it above it. Well, first I need to return this down, and then I can go up and paste. And that should be good. So a couple of things to note here. We are setting up a couple of different global variables. And now this is what I was talking about the other day, or yesterday, if you already watched that, is that variables have the ability of being local. So if we were to say, I don't want you to follow here, but if we were to put these variables here in draw, actually a better example real quick would be if we put these in setup, like we're establishing them, you know, in setup here. Oops. Say we have them in setup and then we wanted to access them in draw. As soon as we try to access player 1, we'd get an error because we didn't create them globally, we created them locally by calling them into play within a block. So to make them be global, to be able to use in any block, we just leave them at the top. And well, you could have them anywhere really, but if you have them at the top, they're going to be read first, right? And if we're all following that same guideline, it'll be easier for us to read each other's code. So what else is going on here? There's a function preload. So just like the other functions, this is its own block of code, and it has a specific function within p5. And in this sense, p5 allows us to load content into the browser before we can access the canvas. Before anything actually happens, it goes through this loading cycle. That's what preload is doing. Otherwise, if we didn't use preload and we just say put this stuff in setup, which we totally could do, it wouldn't have the preload, so it wouldn't initially load everything, and we could start moving around, say, before like a background audio would start playing. So this makes us wait that extra second or so, but in the end, it will have a more smooth experience. Last thing I will say about the function preload is I also did put comments here. So just like I put a comment for a global variable, I also put it at ending a bracket. So the biggest fumble that I see most students do learning coding is ignoring these brackets. And the brackets are they're maintaining that structure of different blocks, right? And even if we click next to one of these brackets, you can see the other one highlights, right? The end one. So rather than say, oh, I want to put this in setup, and you go down here and you paste something, that's not in setup because our bracket ends there for setup. So by going in here and literally, typing out ends setup, ends draw, this seems to help you remember where things start and end. And then later on, as we get into more things like if conditionals, we'll have more brackets. You'll see in a moment, and it'll make more sense why it'll be helpful to comment those brackets. So up here we are loading. So the variables, we're just declaring a name. There's a new variable called player 1 or player 2 or player 3. And up until that point, they're just a name. They don't have any value associated to them. So here in preload, we're now assigning a value. we're telling P5 to load a sound and from a specific location. And because we have an assets folder, right, we do need to add that in the name. So these hyphens here are kind of like quotes, where whatever's in quotes is the actual name. So this stuff has to be typed out accurately, like you have to be case sensitive, and a slash is just for a folder, right? So within assets folder slash and then the name of the file. And we don't have the extension there, as you can see. It's just the name. Right here we're specifying the two different formats. It could be M4A or WAV wave, right? And that's just the two that I included. You guys could totally include your other options. I haven't went through and figured out like what one or two might be the best to use, but I figured I'd go through this approach so that you guys are aware of this from the get-go and get into that habit of including a couple different audio files. Images will be fine, obviously. It's just that some browsers like Firefox don't support M4A, so if you're on a Firefox browser running this, you'd have a problem. So if you do run into a problem, maybe try using a new browser. So if we hit play, it will have that preload. It's loading. And it usually does take longer, like the first time you load something. That's taken a lot longer than it should. Let's try to restart that. Hopefully I haven't ran into my first problem. Interesting. Well, let's see if we need something else in setup here. No, this is just looping audio. But if we put that in, let's try to play. Bummer. I already went through this once. Loading preview. I'm just going to read through this real quick. We have player one. I don't see what the problem is. I'm going to save this and refresh it maybe. Try to play it again. Whatever that was about. So, you kind of, you do enough kind of coding stuff, different side programs like this. You learn to troubleshoot a little bit as you go along. So in that regard, everything seemed to be right. So I just saved, kind of refreshed it, was good to go. So when we do load this, if you get up through this point of putting this player 3 loop inside of the setup, and we play, we just get a background, right? And background color. And then this player 3 audio, which is knock, walk, door, open, that is just looping. Literally just call a loop and it just continuously keeps looping. So hopefully you have that so far. Continue on here after that nice hiccup. We can change the color of the background if you want. I'll just skip over that for now. Okay, so we're going to add another global variable here. And I'm interested in what this is going to do. So I'm going to take out the equals 0 for a moment. But, and then we're going to be placing this below the background color within the void draw block. And this is what people sometimes mess up with, is you don't want to just put it down here. You actually really want to make sure you're putting it below the background, but still within the void draw. So if you were to put it, underneath here and you hit play, you're going to get an error and you have to read the error. Sketch line 31, fill is not defined. Well, what do you mean it's not defined, right? We put it in the wrong spot. So make sure you're reading these errors, and first thing to do is check your brackets. Make sure that you're putting content in the right place. So now, since this is kind of looks jumbled here, I'm going to do a shift tab, which is tidy code. So shift tab, and that'll align everything and tab it over. So let's go ahead and play this. And I don't see anything. Let me do the same thing I just did before. Refresh. Okay, so yeah, I officially don't know why this is a thing. But you do have to have that equals 0. I did mention in the lecture that you don't have to assign a value. These don't have a value assigned to them until down here. So anyway, now that we added a equals 0, or is assigned a value of 0, we do get that to come up. So it was a little bit of a hiccup trying to figure out why it wasn't working for me. So I do want to talk about this, and let's see if I can just mute this for a second. Great. So this is just moving across the screen, right? And we're going to look and see what's going on. So this is already a decent amount of code for those of you who, this is your first time kind of building up with using variables. So we created this thing, right? This name, x. What is x? X equals 0. So this is now a container that holds a value, right? Just like I was saying in the lecture, how if you have a cup of water, right, what percentage of it is full? What's that number from 0 to 100 or whatever you want to put in there? So if we assume from the get-go that x is 0, then we keep going down through the code. It does all this other stuff when it loads. Then once we get down here to line, I'm on line 26. You guys might be something different. This value of x is 0 because we haven't changed that value. However, just like we assigned a value with the equal sign of 2x of 0, we're now going to update that value of x. We're going to assign it a new value, and we're going to assign it the value of itself plus 2. And itself currently is 0, so 0 plus 2 is 2, right? So the new value of x is 2. So after it goes down through, it does everything else, it's going to keep looping draw. Draw is continuously looping. So the next time it goes down through, this is now equal to 2, right? So now we're also assigning a new value to x. X is going to be itself plus 2. Well, it's 2. 2 plus 2 is 4. So we're just adding 2 to itself every time. Right? Is that making sense? Hopefully it's making sense. And as we can see, we're drawing this ellipse at x and another spot with an x. So because that value is updating and changing, you can see it growing. Right? It's moving and it's stretching because we're changing the location and the size. So the next question, I guess, here is like, okay, well, why is it skipping back? Right? It's going back to the left after it gets to the right. That's all involving right here. This bit of code, this if statement. And this is the third chunk of code that I mentioned in the lecture that you guys will have to know is conditional statements. And most of you could probably get away doing the whole project with just ifs. And there's a lot going on here in a small amount of space. So I'm going to take a second and talk about this. So an if conditional, or any conditional, it's set up this similar way as like a function where we have parentheses, right? The function has parentheses. We've got a starting and ending bracket, just like the if here has a starting and ending bracket. So it's following the same principles, right? If it's going to check something, and what is the condition? X is greater than 400. So if x is greater than 400, if this equates to true, then we're going to execute whatever's in between these parentheses. If this equates to false, we just skip over what's in the in the bracket there, and we continue. So that's why it looks like it keeps growing and growing and growing, because we're skipping. But then as soon as we're greater than 400, which is the threshold of the canvas, so as soon as this gets to 400, it's reassigning a value to 0 for x. So then this goes back to 0 and we start all over again. So that's why it looks like it's repeating, right? Only when x is above 400. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much the full way I can explain it. I think that was about all. The last thing I guess I can note is you could see how it's also tabbed over once, right, from the left side. But then also, because we were adding a second layer of brackets, everything in between those brackets is also tabbed over, right? This is tidied. So each layer of brackets. So that's why I say it's nice to comment the final brackets for things so you don't lose place of what's going on. It will also have, it will be indented like that, so that can help. So it's kind of just going over where we're currently at. So at this point, hopefully you all are up to speed. We're going to put in a couple new variables up here, and just like all of the other global variables, we're just putting them right at the top. And I think we only end up using one of them for now, but you guys can keep playing and use the other values for whatever you want. So that was just assigning them, right? We just declared them. We haven't done anything with them yet. So now that we have them there, we can start doing something with one of them. And this is the Z that we're going to be playing with. We're going to be pasting this below, paste the below, that's kind of worded weird, code anywhere beneath the background in the draw loop. So we're looking for background. There is background. We want to paste it below that. Paste. All right. Play that. And I will unmute here for a second. So we still just have the one audio clip running. And let's see. So we pasted Z, right? So Z is doing the same thing that X was doing, right? It's adding to itself, only this is value of 1 instead of 2. And similar thing here, right? It's asking a question. If it's greater than a certain value, then we're resetting the value of Z. Kind of using these different conditional values to plug in for different colors and such. And I think at this point, yeah, I said since we're kind of getting cramped here, and because the following bits will expand with this new dimension, why don't we just go in here and change our canvas to 600 by 600, have a little bit more room. And we'll also see that we're using the print function finally. So anytime we're trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes, we could use print. And so if I commented that out, you could see that there's nothing being printed. As soon as we have that in there, boom, goes to the console, right? So these numbers are updating pretty quickly, but you will see that we get to 120. I just seen it there. Yep, 120, and then it doesn't go beyond 120, right? It's because we have this set here. So we actually can see what's going on behind the scenes with that Z. And the way you can set this up is Z, anything you put in parentheses like this here, I mean within quotes, will be printed. So you can see Z equals down here. That's because I literally typed it out. If we want to just know the value of Z, we can totally just put print Z, and that'll spit out numbers. But the problem is that, like, you know, what if you want to print Z and you want to print X? Which one is Z and which one is X, right? So that's why it's nice to have the, you know, Z equals, and even spaces are helpful. Right, and it looks like, I'm not entirely sure, let's try this out, equals X. Tidy that up here. So we'll have to figure out why exactly this is. X. Huh. You notice how there's two different colors here? So this one, I put in quotes, and that doesn't seem to matter whether it's a quote or an apostrophe. I think P5 is just very lenient within the context of JavaScript and using these in place for quotations. But the difference between a plus and a comma seems to be making a difference. I've always used the plus, but you can use a comma, and I'm I'm pretty sure it's doing the exact same thing. I'm just not sure why there's a different color associated to it. So if anybody knows, it'd be great to know. Anyway, we're always learning. Let's stop that for a second. I've listened to that so long, it's like I just drone out. I was like busy earlier. I was responding to an email and then like got into a wormhole of like sidetracked on my phone, and I was probably laying there for I don't know, like a heat pad, 20 minutes, and I realized the knocking was going on the whole time. Insanity. So the next little bit here on step 13 is we're gonna take this background out of draw. So just select it. You can cut it, Command X or Control X. And then we're gonna go up here, return this down, and paste it in. Right, so we're before the ending bracket of setup, within setup. And if we play this now, we should be able to see the trails happening. Originally this was 1, and in processing you could still see the trails, like the streakiness, but here it's just black, right? Because you're really just seeing the stroke being put over top of itself every single time. So I expanded this out, and you know, the more you expand that out, the more you're going to see that stroke happen. So anyway, that's just kind of giving us some nice visuals happening because we're changing that background. And then we're going to play. This is the trickiest part of code right here, line 14 or step 14. So we're going to place this code within the Z conditional statement. Well, just like we were saying before, like within setup or within draw, right? We're just meaning like before the ending bracket, right? Between the brackets, within that block of code. So we need to put this in the Z block. And our Z block is here, right? It's the only thing that we have brackets for. It's a Z conditional. We want to put this somewhere inside there. So I'm going to just return this down, right? This is before that bracket ends. And I'm going to paste. And this looks like craziness. So I'm going to do Command T or Shift Tab. And there's some notes in there. You know, you could delete those notes out if you want to. I probably will, just for the now. You can leave it in there. I just have a small screen. Did I delete too much here? Yeah, I wanted to leave the player too. So we pasted in here two things, basically, right? We are now going to be adding another audio file played while also loading another background. And this doesn't really matter what it is. Oh, you know what? I thought I updated this. I want you guys to stick with the same background color. It's 220, but now we're going to add transparency, and I think the one color I played with was 170. So now if we play this, we should hear that new audio. And you'll notice that this white color is being flickered, right? Not only is the is this background being redrawn. There is a transparency, so it's not completely covering everything. But then this changes color. And the reason that's changing color is because we were setting it to 0, but we're also playing audio at the same time. So multiple things are happening if one variable is meeting a specific condition, right? We can put whatever we want in here. We could do a ton of things. It's just organizing what's going to happen, right? What's between these brackets that's going to happen if this equates to true. We can do whatever we want. We could actually have another conditional statement inside of here. It's like building and branching off and interconnecting. And you should start to see how this code is piecing itself together. I'm going to go ahead and save because it mentioned it in here. So we're going to paste this last shape. We're going to paste it after all of the other shapes in our sketch, before the final bracket that closes draw. Well, here's draw, that's where it ends. So here's, looks like after the last shape, right? We have 2 ellipses. So I'm going to paste it in there, do a shift tab, right? And it looks like we are now utilizing the Y, and then having that incorporated in the drawing there. So I also added a transparency to this, so that as this is drawing over top of this circles, you can still see it behind, right, in the blue. And I timed this out, so I multiplied this by 5, but if this is by 2, you can see that it's still resetting when you hear that audio, but it's just not going as far. So I manipulated it to the point where it's kind of going to the edge of the screen, so it's kind of imitating like, oh, it hits the wall and then it stops. It's just timing. So this is doing the same similar thing. We're assigning a new value to y, and the new value is z times 5. Well, what's the value of z? Up here, we are actively changing it, and we are printing it to the console. We can see what that value is. If we wanted to see the value of y, we could also do that, right? Print y. And then all of a sudden we can see the value of y. So that's about all that this is covering. It's just integrating some audio. We noticed that we did have the ability to loop audio, or we could just play it, right? Based on whatever our preference is, if we're just trying to play it once, or loop it. I want to try one thing here at the end of this. If I cut this out and I comment the loop out, so right, so now we shouldn't have any audio playing. If I put this play right at the top of draw, you guys hear that? It's glitching out. This is happening over and over and over. We're just playing the beginning of the file, and then playing the beginning of the file, and then playing the beginning of the file over and over. So it worked well being down here in this conditional, because z is only going to be above 120 for one frame. Because as soon as it's above 120, we're immediately setting it back to 0. And then we also are playing the audio file. So it's only happening, every like 3 seconds. So that is the one thing that I will note about the audio, is that you can loop it, right, once. But it's similar thing here. If I were to put this loop here in Draw, it sounds horrendously weird and strange, because it's trying to not only play it but also continue to loop consistently. So you have to kind of understand what the different components, how they function, right? No pun intended with that. And then you have a better understanding of how you can manipulate them and structure them. So I'm hoping this is all pretty straightforward by the time you get to the end here. Make sure that you do add your own comments to anything that seems to be helpful for you to remember. Like, oh, what does z equals sine z plus 1 mean? It might make sense right this second, but then later you might forget like how that's helping, or like what this conditional is doing, because all of your projects will entail like several, if not dozens, of variables that you create on your own, and several, if not dozens, of conditional statements. And you will have to know how to do this. The sooner that you can wrap your head around it and memorize what they're doing, the better. And so I would write down some questions. Make sure you do the reading. That'll totally help. And I'll probably wake up in the morning early and record the overview of the project. I do have a couple different examples to show you guys, so stay tuned.